So today we have Dr. Lee Bement here. He's one of the staff archaeologists at the Oklahoma Archeological Survey, and he's worked there over 20 years, I believe.
Yeah.
So he does quite a bit of work, especially in northwestern Oklahoma, dealing with archaic and archaic and paleo sites. So he's been here before in the past and talked about the comet extinction theory for mastodons and mammoths. He's been here in the past and talked about the Jake's Bluff and Cooper kill sites for bison, which is in the Paleo time frame. And today he's going to talk about a kill site that's in the late Archaic time period. So I think I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jason. I've been at the University of Oklahoma for a little over 20 years now, and I'm still considered one of the new people on the block. But I come from Texas. I got my degrees at the University of Texas, and I moved to OU so we could have a better football team. And then that went downhill. But anyway, I'm also on the faculty at OSU, so sooner or later one of my teams is going to win. But by having connections with all these different places, I get to work with a lot of other scientists in different fields. It's not just archaeology. I work with folks that do soil science. I work with others that do paleontology. And I find that I am increasingly working with more and more people that do chemistry. And that's the way that archaeology is going. We end up pulling in specialists from other disciplines to be able to get more information out of the sites that I'm excavating. So through the course of this evening, I'll probably get into some plant physiology, chemistry, a whole bunch of different kinds of things. Feel free to ask questions if there's something that you don't understand, and I will point to the right person to answer that question. But we'll just kind of see where this takes us. I'm going to be dealing with late Archaic bison kills. Late Archaic is a time period. It's not a type of culture per se. We don't have a name for the people. There's no tribes that we can connect these sites with that are tribes living today. There's no way to bring that connection forward. And the late Archaic is a time period generally between 3,000 years ago up to about 1,500 years ago. And so within that time period, we're dealing with prehistoric peoples that are on foot. They don't have the horse, so all the hunting that's going on is by pedestrian hunters, people walking around. They do not have the bow and arrow yet. This is pre-bow and arrow, so they're using spears, and a lot of the kills look like they're being made with shortened spears or darts that are thrown with the Atlatl, or spear thrower. So kind of keep that in mind. So the technology is people on foot with spears. We're going to start out at the Herald site, which is in the easternmost area of Ellis County, and it's on the north side of the Canadian River. And in this area, the Canadian River has a fairly broad floodplain. The river itself is shallow up until the rains in the last couple of weeks. It was so shallow that there was no water there. But now it has a pretty good flow to it, but it's still shallow because its channel is very broad and it spreads out over the floodplain rather than incising a nice deep channel to it. And the area that I'm most interested in is these high bluffs on the north side the north and west side of the river. And within this drainage area, these high bluffs are bisected by these very short and very deep canyons that have eroded into it. This whole area is underlain by the red bed sandstones of Permian age. And so once a canyon cuts down through into that red bed area, it forms these nice permanent canyon systems. And they're extremely deep, extremely steep walled. And this is where the late Archaic folks are hunting bison. The system that seems to be in place includes the canyons to run the animals up into to get a dead-end area to where the animals are trapped and they can't get out. And also these little isolated promontories that seem to have a lot of cultural activity on top of them, probably by people on a lookout perch who either see which way the animals are coming, or perhaps once animals are moving up a particular drainage, that people on these perches are directing the hunters where to go or which way to move them to try to herd the animals into the desired location. And so we have these kinds of sites. And from that particular perch, you can look down this beautiful canyon all the way down to the river. And this is a distance of less than a mile.
So is this deep like 50 feet, like 100 feet?
From the level of the river here to the level up here is 200 feet.
200.
The drainage in the bottom of this is going to have high walls, so they're going to be as high as this ceiling. And once you get animals moving up one of those canyons, there's no place for them to get out until they get to a dead-end point. And then that's where the kills take place. And this is as we're nearing the Herald site, and you can see that the canyon channel itself is extremely narrow. You can stand in the middle of this and almost touch the walls, almost, just a little bit beyond my reach. And this would be very similar to what the size that it was when it was used to kill bison. This is as we're getting to the end of the drainage, and this is what we call the pour-off or a nick point. This is just as high as the sidewalls, and this keeps the animals from being able to get out. So it's a miniature box canyon to where the animals, once they hit that nick point, they can't get out. They're trapped. You position your hunters up on the rims, and they spear the animals that are just standing there waiting for the lead animal to lead them out of the way. But the lead animal can't go anywhere, so all of them just stand there until they start getting speared, and then all hell breaks loose, I'm sure. This is looking from that nick point back down that same draw, and the nick point has a lot of chip rock right at the end of it. This is partly what has created this erosional stop to where the arroyo itself cannot continue on up. And the kill deposits, the bone deposits are right along this edge here. So the modern arroyo is cutting into the ancient arroyo and exposing the bones. And so all the white dots coming down through here are bison bones. And there's actually two different layers, so two different kill events at the site. And this is a close-up of some of the bones. Here's some vertebra, thoracic vertebra that are still articulated. There's a couple up here. So we have have segments of articulated skeletons still in place, and that would be what was left over after the butchering by the hunters. This is a close-up near where you have the upper layer coming across here and then the bottom layer down below it of the two different kills. The bones are being eroded out. This site was discovered was by the landowner trying to find cows and calves in these draws to get them out of there to mark them. And he came across all these bones coming out. And he's known about this site for probably 20-some years. And through that time, bones erode out from the side. Once they are exposed to the air, to the sunlight, to the weather, they break apart and disappear. They just crumble out of existence. And so we don't know how much material has been lost during the 20-odd years that the landowner knew about it. But our purpose now is to try and get some information from the site before more of it is lost.
So how long have you been working this site? Or has this site been worked?
We've excavated on it for 1 week.
Oh, you
That's
just...
how long.
Okay.
This is a new site, so we don't have a whole lot of information in terms of the excavated material. We've known about the site for a little over a year, so some of the information I'll give you is developed out of materials we collected that had already eroded out. Around the bones, there's what we call a halo effect. And the sediment is usually kind of a reddish-orange, but on the underside of the bones, it turns to a gray color. And this gray color is from microbes decomposing the goo, guts, and gore that's left over after the kill. So it includes pieces of the skin, parts of muscles that weren't butchered off or carved off, the gut piles. All of this, when it gets buried into these sandy deposits, the microbes, some of them probably coming out of the gut pile itself, others were probably already living in the sediments, works to, or metabolizes the nutrients from the goo. And what happens is it's done in an anaerobic condition, so there's no oxygen. And in this condition, then they use the iron, and it is converted into energy, and it takes the redness out of the sediments. And when we see this gray halo, that indicates that the bone bed is intact. It has not been moved around. Because as soon as any of this gets disturbed, that gray goes away. It's easily broken down and redistributed. And so at a number of kill sites, including some that I've worked at that are over 10,000 years old, when we see that intact gray halo, then we know that this is the location where these animals were killed. We refer to this as a gley because it is developed in swamp-like conditions. So that means it's anaerobic, highly moist type of conditions. So for those of you that like microbes, you have that part of it added in. From this site, we have one projectile point, and this is a spear point. It is what we refer to as the Williams type, which generally is between, it fits our late Archaic time period of between 1,500 and 3,000 years old. This one is not very well made. It's beautifully flaked on one surface, but the reverse surface is flat. It's a remnant of the original large plate that the point was made from. And so it just has very minor flaking to shape it.
What did you call it again?
Williams.
How large is that point?
This point's about 2.5 inches. It is similar to points found at other late Archaic bison kills and other late Archaic age campsites. Again, what it has in common are the notches very low at near the base, and they're corner notches, so they're coming in from an angle. And all of these are that way. And again, the size ranges from as small as about 2 inches to possibly as long as 3.5 inches. Now at the Harrell site we have one radiocarbon date, and this was obtained off of bone. There is no charcoal at the site to get a date from, so our date is off of the bison bone itself. And for this we use a particular bone. It's called the petrous, and this is the inner ear at the base of the skull, which is, its name signifies petrous, which means pebble or rock. It is the densest bone in a mammal skeleton. And because it's so dense, it preserves very well. And what we are looking for is the preservation of collagen, or the organic component of the bone, and that's what we need to have to get a radiocarbon date. So the petrous bone from one of the skull fragments that was at this site, we got this date of 2,330 plus or minus 40 years ago. So this fits very nicely in our time frame of 1,500 to 3,000 years ago. Now, the radiocarbon date uses the carbon-14 isotope, that's radioisotope. But in the course of doing a radiocarbon date, we also want to look at the stable isotopes of carbon. And this gives us a way of evaluating whether or not the date is accurate. And so in this case, we look at the ratio of carbon-13 and carbon-12. And it's measured against a known source, and for some bizarre reason that just confuses me to death, it comes out as a negative number. You think they could just make it positive. We'll have to talk to the chemists about that. At any rate, it comes out here at minus 12.5 parts per mil, and this is within the range of what we see bison bone, modern bison will have that ratio. That's for animals on the southern plains that are living during a very dry period where temperatures are hot, rainfall is low. And so in this case, this fits very well with what we expected the climate to be like back then. And so it gives us one measure that the radiocarbon date is fairly accurate. It also provides us a way of reconstructing what the grassland looks like that the animals were eating on, because this is based on the carbon content or the carbon photosynthetic passageway of the grasses, which are divided into C3, would be your moist, cool grasses, or C4 grasses, which are the ones that are adapted to very dry conditions and hotter conditions. If you look around town today, and you'll notice some people's yards are green, and yet the yard right next to it is still gray or brown. And the difference is the types of grasses that were planted for those yards. The lawn that is green is composed of a C3 grass that grows quickly in the springtime with the first hints of moisture. They're adapted to cool and moist conditions. They'll have beautiful yards all the way up into about the middle of June, and then their grass is going to start dying off, going dormant. And the neighbor's yard that's looked like heck all the time, all of a sudden turns out to be green. And the temperature is going up, it's getting hotter. Now we're into the dry period of the summer, and C4 grasses that are adapted to xeric conditions starts to grow. So you have to decide, do you like mowing the yard early in the year or in the heat of the summer as to which type of grass you plant. That's basically what happens out on the open prairie, is you get mixtures of these two types of grasses. And by measuring that carbon isotope, we can tell that this bison, 65% of his diet was based on C4 grasses, 35% on C3 grasses. So this means that the dominant climate at this time was hot and dry. And we can see changes through time in this climate on the southern plains, going from dry to getting periods where it's very dry, and then over the course of about 300 years, we get to a much wetter time period as we near 1,500 years ago. What happens at the end of this 1,500-year slice is this is when new people come down into the plains and they bring with them horticulture. They're bringing corns, beans, and squash. And so as the climate is getting wetter, they are moving in because now you can all of a sudden start to plant crops. Whereas before then, it was too dry to plant crops. So we get an environmental component to why different cultures move into the area. Now we rely on these bones for a lot of other information. One is we want to know what time of the year the kill took place. Because this puts the people in a particular spot on the landscape at a time of the year. So we'll look at a calf jaw and see how old that calf was at the time it died. And we can determine that by looking at which teeth have erupted and how much wear there is on those teeth. We can do this today with cattle. We can do it with, it's done a lot with horses. You look in the horse's mouth to see how old he is. You can do it with kids to a certain age. You guys will discover this later on. In this case, with bison, we can determine the age it was when it was killed to within plus or minus 1 month. In this case, this animal was approximately 8 months old at the time of its death. Because bison have a fairly restricted calving season, we're just now starting to get into the calving season of bison. So if we say 80% of the calves were born in April, his calf was 8 months old when it died. When did it die? December. Yeah, for those of you that like counting, it takes both hands to do it, or you just read on the slide. But anyway, so this means that it's a wintertime kill. And by doing this at a number of different kill sites, we can see where people are moving around and how much of these kills take place at the same time of the year. At Harrell, we also have a 3.7 to 8 year old and a 4.7 to 8 year old, and these are in the uppermost kill deposits. And so this suggests that all those animals in that upper kill deposit were killed at the same time. It's a catastrophic event rather than a attritional one where they just kill one animal and bring the next one up and kill it over the course of several months. This is all one big kill event. Now I'm going to quickly take you to a second late Archaic kill site. This one is the Certain site. Both of these sites were named after the landowners. I mean, this one's an unfortunate name. Yes, we're certain that it's a bison kill site. We'll really wish he had a different name besides certain. Whereas Harold was up here, certain is just down here at the tip of Beckham County. It too has a very deeply incised canyon into the red beds. And along that canyon there are short gullies that have been cut into it, here and here. In both places there are bison bones you rode out of the side walls of these two. We took a coring truck and we cored all along the edge and found that there is another side gully here with bison bone and another one here that has 5 different levels of bison bone and another one up here. So all along this we have 5 different side arroyos with somewhere close to 10 to 12 different kill events in them. And so some of the work in these side arroyos coming in is what we've concentrated on off and on for the last 20 years. There's also on the side areas over here a little camp spot where somebody spent the night after the kill was made. They'd been butchering animals, the meat was being hauled off by some people to a larger camp somewhere else. Others stayed behind and spent the night. They have a fire pit with a rack of ribs on them. That's pretty nice, my kind of folks. Don't know what kind of barbecue sauce they use though. But both of these have racks of ribs in them, and then there's another one up here. So they're spending the night and then continuing the butchering. Probably each one of these kills took approximately a week to butcher. Within these gullies, again, you have the high walls, and these things are deeply buried, easily 12 to 15 feet down. And here you can see 2 of the different kill levels. And when we get into them, it's not just a light scattering of bone, it is a complete blanketing of a level to where there's no place to stand or sit. They are so compacted with bones. And in amongst the bones, each one of these little orange flags represents where a resharpening flake was found. These are the flakes, and when the butchering knife gets dull while you're butchering up the animals, these guys just stopped and would flake a sharper edge on them. So these little bitty flakes from resharpening of that edge are just scattered in and around the bones. And so this is one of the locations where someone stopped and sharpened the butcher knife. And then we also find fragments of projectile points. Here's a broken off tip. And we have, somewhere in this one is another tip. Sure, it's in there. Oh, there it is. It's right up here. But you can see we end up with, here's a skull of an animal, a series of ribs, more ribs, part of an articulated leg. And so the butchering that goes on at this site consists of 2 types. One is more of what you would consider a normal butchering pattern, to where the carcass is totally dismantled. The bones of the legs are all cut apart. The meat is stripped off of everything, and then the bones are thrown into a pile. And we see that at a number of the different kills, that's certain. But there's another type of butchering that's really bizarre, and we refer to it as bison on the half shell. You take your bison and you lay them over on the side, and you remove the front leg and the hind leg and the rib cage from the upward side, but you never touch the lower side. And so what you're left with is a nicely articulated half shell of a buffalo, and the upper stuff is totally gone. Now we know that they hadn't already removed some of the meat off of the lower side and then rolled it over. We know that it's still in, because the kills that took place really late in wintertime still had the fetuses left in place inside the animal. And so the upper side would have been removed and butchered. The gut pile and the fetus is still made in place. So they never got to it. Now, in some more modern cultures, particularly on the northern plains, the fetus is considered a delicacy. These guys apparently didn't think so. Here, this particular area, we have a fairly completely articulated calf. The legs coming out here. This animal was laying under some very large cows, and it looks like the calf was trampled to death during the kill episode, and it never was butchered. It's just in its prone position, how it got smashed in there. More typically, we see segmented carcasses here. You're looking at a skull with the neck vertebra, the cervical vertebra is coming down and then it's been cut. Here's the same sort of thing with the skull, cervical verts, and then it's been cut off. So here the animal's neck is now severed and moved away from the rest of the animal. And in these cases, the skull itself has been bashed open to get to the brain. The brain either could have been eaten, but more likely the brain was used to tan the hides. Brain tanning is one of the best tanning methods that these guys would have had for hiding. Typically, as we get into one of these kill areas, the closer to the main stem of the canyon you are, the lighter is the scattering of bones. And then as you move up into these side gullies, you'll hit an edge, and then it'll just be a continued blanket of bison bones. And so here you can see how it starts to fill in with more and more bones. And in trench eye, again, the same sort of pattern is repeated. And as we excavate down into it, we start getting into the bones, and then underneath these little fragments, it'll just be a continuous blanket of bison bones. Every one of the separate kill events that have been found at certain, all have the same style of projectile points. You can see this one went out. And you've already seen this slide, but all of these are from a certain site. And we now have 28 projectile points from the site, but that's only 28 points out of over 9,000 bones that have been excavated. So they are retrieving as many of the projectile points as they can to reuse them in later hunts. So these would be ones that perhaps were purposely discarded fragments, or ones that others that became lost in the gut piles and they just weren't able to retrieve them. They didn't find them. I guess in some of these, snorkeling for points in the gut pile wasn't done routinely. I mentioned the fetuses, and this is one of the fetal skulls. This would be the upper tooth row, so the skull itself is going up this way, and this is both mandibles that would fit into it. This whole fetal skull is about the size of a grapefruit. Kind of good sized grapefruit, maybe softball size. And this fetus would be approximately 6 months developed. So it still has another 3 months to go to birth.
What's the gestation period for a bison?
9 months. The rut occurs in July and August, and then the calving season is April. We have our radiocarbon dates from a certain site. Also are within our time period of, this is 2,200 years old, and the most recent is up here at 1,570. So that, and 1560 up here. So again, from 1,500 years ago back to about 3,000 years ago. And if we look at the stable carbon isotopes, we see our various ranges with a -8, -7. This is extremely dry, represents dry periods, whereas a -12 will be more moist. The extremely wet climate would have the stable isotopes from the bison bone would be somewhere around -19 to -20. That would be 100% diet on C3 grasses, on springtime grasses. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that on the southern plains for about 10,000 years. With this year, last couple of years being no exception. An animal in Oklahoma that is born and raised over the last 5 years will be in the -7 to -8 because we're in the middle of a drought. And most grasses that you see out there are going to be C4 grasses. So they will be up in this range if they are 100% C4 grasses. Although we really prefer to see it down, way down here, where it would be only 10 to 20% C4 grasses. Today, to get that sort of climate, you have to go up into southern Canada to get that kind of grassland. Maybe Yellowstone, you might still be able to get that grassland on some years. So in summary, our late Archaic kills consist of generally kind of a late fall through early spring kill events of birds ranging, or groups of animals ranging from probably as small as 30 animals to as much as 150 animals at a time. They are being run into dead-end canyon systems where they become trapped or they can't escape out of these high-walled gullies. The hunters are on top of the arroyo, spearing them down beneath them. And then butchering ensues immediately thereafter. And it varies as to whether it's 100% dismantling of the carcass, which tends to happen earlier in the year in the late fall part of the season. By the time we're getting into springtime, the butchering switches over to bison on the half shell, possibly because other game are becoming available. They are hunters that are on foot. They are adapting as the bison adapt in terms of how the climate changes from very dry to more moist until eventually the late Archaic bison hunters are replaced by horticulturalists, forcing the bison hunters to move either probably much further west out of this area. Any questions?
I don't really know how to explain what I want to ask, but you said about the layers. There's different layers. Does that just mean like there's different kill times?
There are different kill events, yes.
Yeah.
So you'll have,
Can you tell us like by how much dirt or whatever is in between each layer, what the length was between kill times?
the amount of dirt between each kill events that's partly it. Part of the problem is some years you get more rain that washes more dirt in, and so it can build up faster. And other years it only puts in a little amount. More what we see is in bones that don't get totally buried. If the next herd is running and killed on top of them, they can trample those bones and break those bones. And based on the type of fracture patterns, we can tell how fresh those bones were. So if you get a fracture pattern that shows there's still some grease in those bones and you get these real nice spiral type breaks, then that means that from the time of one kill event to the next one is less than 3 years. If, however, you don't get those nice spiral breaks in the trampling, and instead they're cracked and different types of breaks, means it's been longer than 3 years between kill events. And at certain, it looks like they're moving from this gully 1 year, and then the next year they'll pick a different gully along that same system, and then they'll move to again another one. 5 different gullies that we know about that were being used, and they just keep alternating. Anything else?
Are most of these kills in the fall or early winter that you've looked at?
They're fairly evenly distributed, starting in about October and going through February. I think we have one that might be in March. But they always start in fall, and that's when most of the real heavy butchering, the ones that are there, get the heavy butchering.
Would that be in part associated with being able to preserve the meat longer? It'd be cooler, they could dry it out?
That would be part of it, but it also has to do with they're relying on that meat to get them through the winter time, and so they will do a heavier processing of it. But even the kills that are taking place in January, it's still going to be plenty cool in that. They're still, in some cases, doing the same amount of processing. So it has to do with setting up stores for the winter.
Right.
It looks like they're probably going to be drying most of the meat. We don't have any structures or anything that suggests that they're piling things and freezing it and expecting it to stay frozen for an
Now these hunters that are primarily nomadic, aren't they? Or are they permanent in an area?
These guys will have semi-permanent camps where they're staying through the winter time. And then after things... Then they move. And then during the summer and fall, later spring through early fall, then they're moving all over the place. But their main winter camps look like they're staying in one spot for at least 3 months, if not 4 months of the year.
So have we found any of these more permanent structures close to these sites where they were staying? Any large numbers of people that...
The closest campsite for the certain site is 5 miles away.
And how large of a site do you think it was?
And that one is large enough that it probably had somewhere around 200 people in it.
It's a pretty good size.
Now, at the Herald site, we're just getting into working that area and looking for camps. Our closest late Archaic camp is fairly small. It probably would have held maybe 50 people. Doesn't look like it was being lived in for the entire winter. It probably served as a base while they were doing their hunting, and then it was moved to a more permanent area. So in that region, it's going to be probably closer to 10 miles to what we know now is a good late Archaic wintertime camp. So basically, when they are doing the butchering, they're taking this meat and transporting it to a camp that's quite a distance away. And so we don't have a nice camp set up right there at the kill site. Yep.
What was like the youngest calf that you found, besides the one that was born? What was that?
We have calves that are right at the calving season, so it would have been in April. It would have been either a full-term calf, fetus, or a newly born calf. But the majority of them are much later in the year, at least 6 months old.
Any human remains found in any of these sites? I mean, do we have any hunters that slipped off the rocks and got down there and got trampled? Or?
If they did, they didn't leave them there.
Okay.
There's no human remains have been found at any of these. We wouldn't expect them to just butcher up, poor running bear. So no, if there are mishaps,
Lithic material.
yeah, and I'm sure mishaps happen.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm fixing to say that much commotion going on.
They would take their injured and dead somewhere else. At least we haven't found any marks on them.
With regard to your buffalo and the half shell, are there any other theories other than it's happening at a time when there's more game and so they're not using it all?
The other thing is that in those gullies and those deposits, it's very, very sandy. And it could be that by the time that you've been working with the upper parts, you get down to the lower part, that it's so filled in with sand that the meat is ruined, or it's not worth the hassle of trying to clean it, would be the other.
On those half shells, did they butcher the whole animal or just do the top half?
Just the top half.
I mean, excuse me, did they skin the whole animal to get the whole hide?
We don't even have cut marks on the bones on the underside, so that
so they didn't skin it out.
That they didn't skin it out.
Kind of like a processed deer.
Kind of like
Now, in terms of what these points look like and the size of them, I have some here. This is what they are. This is what they're killing them with. Well, it's interesting, you can kill a buffalo with just a sharpened stick. So you kind of wonder why they go to the trouble to make a spear point to go into it. Other than, this is a lot more effective than just a sharpened stick. And being able to penetrate through that dense hair. And it is. But when you're throwing a spear with an atlatl, with the spear thrower, the atlatl serves to lengthen your arm. And by lengthening your arm means that you get an exponential amount of force in terms of, if you think of throwing a spear in javelin style, the motion that imparts force into that spear shaft is mainly this motion here. And you can think of it as an arc. And as you move through an arc, at the speed of my finger going through that arc, if I extend and double the length of my arm and go through that same arc, the speed out here that is being traveled is exponentially higher than the speed here. And so that imparts exponentially more force into that spear. And when you measure that amount of force, and they've done these experiments by setting up a pressure plate and having somebody throw a spear at the pressure plate, and when it hits that plate, it registers into the computer how much foot-pounds is exerted on that pressure point. And then you do it with the atlatl. The first time they did it with the atlatl, the spear went through the pressure plate. So they had to reinforce the pressure plate. The next time they did it, they saw that it increased the impact by over 50%. And with an experienced atlatl thrower, they could get it up to 200 times more force on a short distance. They're going for the chest, the regular vital area, to get into the lungs. So if you guys need a good physics experiment, go with the atlatl and the pressure plate. Or, volunteer as the target.
Now, were these points at the certain side or the
Yes.
house side?
These are from the certain side. You guys are welcome to come take a look at these. You don't have to worry about them. They allow me to take these out here because they're plastic.
Were your Atlatl experiments done with a bolt stone attached to the Atlatl?
They have done it both ways
Now what's
and
the
have found that the boat stone provides no advantage to the Atlatl that they can tell, at least in terms of force. Maybe it has something to do with accuracy or being able to level out the consistency of your motion.
Okay. I've heard theories that bolt stones were a counterweight for ambush posturing as well. You know, it's easier to hold it if you have a counterweight back here.
Could be. Anytime I've used one that had a weighted stone on the spear thrower, I had never got any advantage, but then I'm not that fine-tuned of an Atlatl user. So, anything else? Thank you.